Live.
All right, we are live. Welcome to OnSet. I am Daniel Norton here in the Adorama event space with Cadence. Seth over here on the Mighty Mix. Oh, he's got headphones today. Do this.
No, I'm going to apologize to the chat in advance. It's a scorching hot day and the air conditioner is rocking in here, so apologize about the sound.
All right, so if you hear anything moaning, it's not because my jokes are bad, it's the air conditioning. All right, so today we're going to talk about lighting ratios. I'm going to kind of break down. Here's the thing. I'm just going to give it to you up front. In the end, it's good to know what I'm about to teach you, but really a lot of it comes down to feel. So when you're looking at a subject and you're setting up a lighting ratio, you are doing it based on what you're observing as you're creating the image. It's going to change depending on what you want for the look, who the person is, what light sources you have. But we're going to talk about how to set it up and get some kind of general ones and how we might get ourselves in place. Why is that still useful then? Am I just doing a class to fill some time? Maybe. It's hot outside, there's air conditioning in here. But no, the reason why it's useful is because if you don't have a subject in front of you, or you're trying to create something that's more general, like let's say you're coming in, you've got a job, you've got to make a bunch of portraits, you're going to want to have some idea of how to set your lights without a subject in front of us. Digital photography and being tethered has really opened up the doors for us to be like more spontaneous and kind of go with the flow and with the feel, but it still is useful to be able to just set things up based on the numbers. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Oh, maybe I'll even use a light meter. Do we have a light meter?
Yeah.
All right, because I have my old one, and when I use it, Seth makes fun of me.
This is the old.
Oh, all right. He's going to make fun of me then. All right, so, all right, so here we go. So what is a lighting ratio? It just means that we're talking about our key light, which is our main light, our light that shapes our subject. The ratio of all the other lights in there to the key light is your lighting ratio. So like you might have heard before that, oh, for a portrait, a 1:4 ratio is good. What they're talking about there is the key light being 1, that means on exposure. So if you're reading 5:6 and 5:6, and then the fill light would be 2 stops less, or 1/4 the amount of light, right? Because every time it doubles, right? Every stop is a double. So 1 stop is half, 2 stops is a quarter, 3 stops, and so on. All right, so that's basically it. That was the whole thing. Is it 6 o'clock? No, all right, so let's do this. Let's take some pictures. All right, so we're gonna just set up with basic lighting here, and then we're gonna kind of work through some different ratios and what ones are kind of common and what we might wanna do. I'm gonna make sure I frame this up so that we don't see any of the top of Cadence's head. All right, good. Perfect, all right. I'm gonna use a beauty dish for this. The main reason why I'm using a beauty dish for this particular demo or setup is because this has you can't see it. Seth gets mad if I don't show it to the camera. This is a beauty dish. Has a grid on the top. The grid is gonna help us really control where the light falls, so hopefully you guys will see the shadows a lot better. You can use all kinds, you can use the same theories, things we're doing with softboxes, umbrellas, etc. But the beauty dish we're gonna use just for control. At least to start. We got time. All right, so this is in a Profoto B10X Plus, which is a battery-powered light. I will try to name all the gear as I go, but they don't all have names written on them, so we'll see if I can know them all. This is going to be fired by our camera using a TTL remote. The camera is a Nikon Z6ii because they haven't given me a 3. All right. I mean, it's new.
Check out my video.
Check out Seth's video on Adorama TV about the new Nikon Z6ii. Definitely worth looking at. All right, so number 1, we're gonna do what we always do, which is we're going to set up a black frame. Now, whenever you're using flash, well, really any lighting, but definitely flash, one of the things that we use it for is to control the space, right? I'm in this space and it's well lit. Seth spent hours, he'll tell you all about it if you let him, how he built this from scratch. There's nice light in here, right? I don't look this good in person. Right? So maybe this is fine, but if you're in some, terribly lit space, like if you were down there at the store, you're outside in the bright sun, in an apartment where you have just like pockets of light, you're not going to necessarily want that light to affect your shot. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our exposure to the camera so that without any flash, we have a black frame or no exposure. So here we are. We are at 100 ISO because that is the lowest ISO within the normal range of the camera. We are at a 200th of a second, which is the fastest shutter speed that syncs normally. I know this high-speed sync, we're not gonna talk about that today because not everybody uses it, so we'll pretend it doesn't exist. So 100 and 200 are basically our numbers that are always gonna be with this camera in this thing. The third part of our exposure triangle is our aperture. We need to set that based on what it takes to get a black frame, basically. Depends on where you are. If you're in a pretty dark space, it might be as low as f4 or 2.8. If you're in a bright space like here, I know it's somewhere around f8. So we're gonna start at 7.1 because that was the maximum aperture of my first 4x5 camera.
Do you want to do live view?
Yeah, we can do that. We'll do live view. Ooh, high tech here. All right, so you're looking through the camera now. Awesome. So now normally, I'll just talk about this. I have the camera set so we don't see the fake exposure, right? This is the real exposure of the ambient light. And this is if you're working quickly, this is a great thing to do because I can just look at it and see it's black. If a lot of times people will leave their camera set to kind of give you the fake exposure, like the exposure with the flash on it, like there we go. That's not really the exposure, right? That's just so you can see to focus. This is the exposure with no flash, okay? Or no exposure faking. I don't know what they call it. I'm sure there's a technical term for that. Simulation. This is a simulation. All right. I'm not level. And Seth gets mad if I'm not level, so let me just...
Stop saying I'm mad at everything.
He's not mad. He's not mad at all. All right. All right, so here we go. Let me shoot a black frame.
He's not mad at all.
He literally sells a shirt that says, I'm not mad, I'm from Brooklyn.
I actually took down my online store. Thanks for reminding me.
All right, so black frame. Now, this is important, more important here than it's ever been before. We want to now see how underexposed we are because this is going to tell us where our shadows lie, right? So when we start seeing some detail in her, like around there, we can see at 2.12, so about 2 stops, we start bleeding in the ambient light, right? So that means our shadows are at 2 stops under. So in theory, with just the light shooting on her, if we allowed the ambient light to fill in, we would actually get, I'd have to open up the lens obviously to do it, we would actually use the room as fill. We're not going to do that, maybe we'll do that later.
There's a question.
Oh, question.
All right, so in the chat, Skip's asking, how do we do ratios when the sun is our separation light or backlight? So if the sun is to the back of our subject.
Okay, so when you are working with a light source that you cannot control, the simplest thing to do is to base your exposure off of that. That is to say, you can't change the sun, right? So if the sun is your backlight and you want your backlight to be 2 stops or 3 stops brighter than your key light, let's say, then you're gonna set your exposure 2 stops down and then fill in with the flash to equal that exposure. Does that make sense? So if you can't change the light, and you want to use it, here I just got rid of it, right? I'm changing it. And then you've got to base your exposure on it. If I wanted to make these her backlight, I would have to, she'd have to be here first of all. I would have to set my exposure for her hair based on what this is, because I can't change it, right? Technically, Seth can change these lights, but imagine we can't. Okay, so now the second part of this. Again, we're going to use TTL, which is through the lens metering. I'm just going to have my remote on here. We've got the beauty dish in position, and I'm just going to make a photo, okay? And what we're going to get is a proper exposure, ideally. Well, it kind of is if you like it really bright. This is like, you ever see a shot like kind of edgy, like 90s nightclub, you know, it's like on camera flash, kind of, this is what we're going for here. But this is not what we're going for, so we're gonna not do this. All right, so our exposure's a bit hot. A little bit. I mean, Cadence is fairly fair-skinned, so what we've got here is, and this will happen sometimes, you've got a TTL exposure that's not what you wanted, okay? So just make sure your settings are correct, which they are, and you got a couple options. The first thing I usually do is just take another shot. Sometimes it just goofs up. Okay, that's already a little bit better. But if it's still too bright for you, you can make some changes. I could either switch over and do a change in the exposure, or possibly look at my metering, right? Like I'm in matrix, I'm sure. No, I'm in spot actually. Okay. I'm in spot metering, so I'm gonna change it to matrix. See if that gives me a better exposure. Well, same, at least it's consistent. All right, so because of that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a change up here. I'm just gonna come in and I'm going to dial this down half a stop. And we'll see if that works for us. Ah, there we go. All right. Okay, so what I did there is I turned the light down proportionately to what TTL thinks is the right exposure. One thing we have to remember when we're using TTL is when you make an adjustment, you're not making an adjustment. Like, it's not like the light's set at 5 and you're changing it to 6. You are saying whatever exposure you think is correct, dial it down half a stop. Why is this relevant? Because it's not if I don't move this light and she stands here, but because I'm using TTL, if I move this light back, it will need to know to make an adjustment because it's going to reassess the light every single time. It's like a little mini photo assistant running out there with the little light meter, going back and making a change. So now we have our key light set up. And what we've got here is effectively a shadowy shot, which is what we're going for so we can show the ratios better. That make sense? Questions, thoughts, concerns?
There's a question in the chat asking if in low light rooms to use your modeling light to close the subject's pupil.
Okay, in a low light situation, I sometimes will use the modeling light to help me focus. I don't necessarily do it to close their pupil. It could. That will increase, you know, the bright color. It really depends on the person. No, it's not something I do a lot, but I've definitely seen people do that. All right. But if I was going to do that, by the way, if I wanted to have that effect, I would more likely use a constant light source because that will just do it, and I won't have to worry about thinking about the modeling light and how it might affect the shots in other ways. So I don't normally do it, but you certainly can. Okay, we have our base light. Now we're going to bring in some ratios here. Across her face, the light's pretty even, right? But we do have a shadow under her nose, a loop lighting shadow, as they would call it, and we've got a shadow on the side of her face. We can fill this in. The fill light is going to be our ratio, and I could do it with a reflector like I always do, but then we won't really know what it is, right? Because we want to actually be able to do numbers here. So I'm going to use a flash. We're going to go right to an active fill light. Now, when we're using an active fill light, we want to place it in a way that it does not create its own shadow that will be distracting. That is to say, you don't want to put it, you know, here because her nose is like this, right? If this one shadow's here, if we don't balance it exactly right, we're going to get two shadows, and that's going to look weird. So you don't want to do that. We want our light to feel like it's coming from one direction. So how can we fill this light? Now you might say, well, let's use a reflector here, but the reflector, remember, is never going to be brighter than the light it's reflecting, so that's why. What we want to use is what's called on-axis fill. We want to have our fill come from the same direction as the camera. It'll just throw light directly back. And we can do that a lot of ways. You could use almost anything you want, but generally something big is going to be better for us because it'll be more subtle. This is a Chimera panel frame. I built this myself. Those who were here earlier saw that. And basically, what this is going to give us is a large source of light without having a giant softbox, which would be, you know, much more expensive. And also, we can put this in a kind of a smaller space. So all we do is we put it on its own stand, and we shoot light through it. I'm going to do that right now. And while I do, Seth will read a poem.
A poem?
I don't know.
What are you doing?
He's not going to read a poem. Seth is not going to read a poem.
Let's talk about Dan's zip-off shin pants over here.
I would like to know, actually, and you can tell us in the chat, if you've ever had pants that zip off the legs. And if so, have you ever zipped the legs off? That's really the big...
No, but for real, while Dan's doing that, you got 200 people watching and 43 likes. Dan feeds his family on likes, so smash like, feed Dan's family. Thanks.
That's actually accurate. Unfortunately, that's what the world's come to, right? If you don't like... I'll go home feeling like I wasn't successful, and I'll probably weep. I will weep. I mean, maybe people want that. I don't know.
Dan,
will you like the video if I promise to weep? All right, so I'm going to place this here. We probably should use a sandbag. I'm waiting for the sandbag police to come and yell at me. All right, so when we're using a C-stand like this, yep, we want to put the weight. Oh, that's good thing I moved it. Yeah, we want to put the weight on the leg that's the sorry, we want to put let me spin it out. We want to put the weight over the leg that's sticking out, and we want to put the sandbag over that same leg. So just like that. That's how we do it. This is how we do it. All right. I'm going to place this behind me. This is how you know that I came up in the 90s, because everybody in the 90s puts a light behind them. It's a very trendy. You start looking at those pictures real close, you see photographers in the model's eyes. All right, so we're going to put this here, and I'm just going to throw the modeling light on for a second so you guys can see. This is filling this whole frame. In fact, someone's probably even. We're going to leave it on. All right. Now, somebody's about to say, well, Daniel's going to throw a big shadow across Cadence. But the thing is that the way the light works, this is a very large diffused light. It's just going to pour around me and gently fill in. Now, to set up our fill light, we want to think about our ratio. So a 1-to-1 ratio would be equal, right? Like basically flat. And you might still want to do that. You might just say, well, why would you do that? You're not going to have any shape. Because there's other reasons, like the beauty dish is more specular. It will have a different shape to the face even if we go 1-to-1. In fact, let's do that. So the way we can set this up using TTL and not use a meter or anything is I'm going to actually turn this light off for a second, just to show you what it looks like first. Oh, yeah, question.
So the question in the chat from Rob is, what's the minimum on-axis fill softbox to avoid shadow when in front of it? So I'm guessing size of the box. It's a small size. Right? Is that what you're asking, Rob?
Okay, so it needs to be big enough that it's bigger than you, and it needs to be close enough that it wraps around you. That is to say that if I took a little softbox that was this big and I put it right behind me, it would not leave a shadow in front of me, although I'd block so much of it, it's not worth it, right, size-wise. But if I took it and backed it way up, it might throw a shadow, because why is that? Because hard light throws shadows, right? The smaller the light source is relative to the subject, so if you take the small softbox and back it up, it's going to become smaller. So I would say 2x3 maybe?
It's relative to how much you're blocking and how close it is to you.
But if you're going to stand in front of it like this, like 2x3 is probably the smallest. I wouldn't go that small, but you probably could get away with it. In fact, we can actually use this as well, which is smaller. This is a Manfrotto Halo Compact reflector. You can hold it out like that. You could, if you didn't put the thing inside, you could have like a lion jump through it. All right, let's start. All right, here we go. I'm going to make an exposure in TTL, no modifications, just this light firing. And in theory, we should just get a nice flat image. Yep, there it is. Now we do see, of course, Cadence's shadow on the wall. What's funny is we actually see what this is. Just if you're curious, does anybody know what that is? It's a beauty dish, yep. It's hitting the beauty dish, and because now, remember, I'm right here. So relative to me, this light is gigantic. So I'm not throwing any shadow, it's just wrapping around. But as it gets closer to the beauty dish is, it's smaller to the beauty dish, which makes it a harder light, which means it throws a shadow. And it's also possibly because it's reflecting off the ground, is why it's doing that. But anyways, that's just a flat light. We're not gonna worry too much about that right now, because that's not gonna matter in a second, because we're not gonna leave it at full blast. But here we go, and that's a straight up light. And there you go, that's not terrible, right? If you remember, or if you like this shot here.
Not terrible is always the goal, Dan. We strive,
yeah,
we strive.
I mean, this right here is in the same portfolio. Like, you're basically there with that.
My next demo.
You just have to be good at explaining to the model why the image it looks good. No, you look great. Okay, so, all right, so that's just that light. We're gonna turn on this one as well. And I'm not gonna do actually I will. I'm gonna leave this at the -5. So weirdly, to get the 1-to-1 ratio, we may have to do this. This light is actually gonna technically be exposing half a stop brighter than this one, but that's only because there's silver in here, and don't worry about math. All right, here we go. Let's just see what we get. I might go back down to 1-to-1 with this one. All right, you see, I mean, yes, there's a shadow on the wall from the beauty dish, like we said. We're not worrying about that. But you see that even with the ratio at 1-to-1, it does look different, right? I mean, because the beauty dish is still shaping her face, even at a 1-to-1 ratio. See how it's better still? Look at her jawline.
You see it on her jawline and the shape of her lips.
shape of her ellipse. You see the difference there. So direction of light is super important. Even though both these lights are effectively the same exposure, this is still our key light because it is shaping our subject. It's giving us shape and form. So while 1-to-1 ratio is not something that I would say you want to use a lot, it's not always bad to use, right? So, but let's get away from that because 1-to-1 ratio is bad. No, I'm just kidding. I just said it wasn't bad and I said it was bad. See how I contradicted myself?
Dan, it's all just a matter of styles.
Yeah,
Nothing's
right.
wrong
Comes down
or
to what
right.
you're doing. So that's 1-to-1. So now if we want to, if we lower the, so now, all the people that hate TTL in the chat online are getting excited for a second. I'm going to turn off the TTL. This is a good time to do that. Once you have your lights kind of set, if you go to manual at this point, at least with the Profotos and with many different lights now, you can actually have them lock in their settings. This way, nothing's going to change. So you don't get some odd thing where the meter picks up part of her dress or something, and all of a sudden we have a weird exposure. So all of our exposures, for better or for worse, are going to be the same now. But we're going to turn this light down. Excuse me, my throat is.
You don't want water? You want water?
Yeah, well, I have some there. I have some, thank you. All right, so let's do this. This is the B group. It's in 7, the power right now for it is 7.3. So if I bring it down to 6.3, that lowers it 1 stop. Which means, because remember they were the same exposure before, this is now half the amount of power, right? So this is a 1-to-2 ratio. Now I just want to point this out, because this is important. This light is going to expose half, or a stop under rather, it's going to be half the amount of power, but if we look at the actual power of the light, this light is set at 6.3, this light is at 6.8, okay? You see, that's only a half a stop difference. The power of the light itself is not the ratio. The exposure is. That is so key. So if you have a bunch of lights that are all exactly the same, they're the same distance, that have the same modifier, that everything's exactly the same, then yeah, the power of the light makes a difference. But really, the actual power of the light set at doesn't matter. What matters is the exposure, okay? So right now, this light back here is 1 stop less exposure than this one. And we should get a little bit more of a darker shadow. There we go. Right now we have, and remember,
Now she has arms.
yeah, remember this is with no fill, right? Now we have a nice shadow on her face that shapes her face, yet we have detail, and she has an arm.
Question in the chat: What ratio is optimal? That's a matter of style. What you're trying to achieve in the image.
Right, so that's really the point. That's one major point here, is that while there are ratios that you might want to start with based on like your experience, what you're going to have to do is get a feel for each individual image. In the end, because this is a 1/2 ratio, does that make it better than if I had just turned my light down a little bit because I felt in my gut that it should be less bright? Not really. Why would it matter? It matters if I want to repeat it. Ratios aren't something that I walk into a shoot going, I want to shoot this ratio. Ratio is something I note after the shoot is over so I can reproduce that image. That make sense? It's not something I decide up front. I decide in the moment because photography is art, you know, in this style of photography. If you're shooting some kind of product thing that you're matching something, that's a whole other thing. But in a portrait, we're creating art. Once we know we like something, we make notes. You know, we used to write them on the back of a Polaroid. Now you write them in your head, I guess, in your iPhone. You put them in the metadata or the EXIF data. All right, questions, thoughts, concerns? No, all right. So in my opinion right now, I think this is pretty good. We could go a little darker. We could go one more stop and go 1-to-4. So let's see what that looks like. So this goes from 6.3 to 5.3. So again, this light now is exposing 2 stops less than this one. Okay. See the difference, right? 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-4. Oh, no, why am I not? I'm pressing the wrong button. 1-to-4, there we go. Oh, and Nothing, whatever the ambient is, okay? So this is no fill, so basically nothing, right? This is 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 4. And this comes down to, I'm gonna bring up the last two. This partially comes down to what you're trying to achieve. And also keep in mind, we want to get it as close as we can, obviously in the camera, that's a big deal. But at the same time, keep in mind the dynamic range of your camera, right? Because you might want it more shadowy, but it might make more sense to make it flatter just so that you can always make it a little denser, right? But if your shadows go too dense and your camera can't handle it, depending on the camera you have, that might not go good. You might start graying out to bring it back. So sometimes it's a good idea to be a little flatter than you think you want. And then if you're using something like Capture One, was there a question? Yeah.
So Timothy's asking, what if you wanted to create deeper midtones? Is there a ratio that may achieve that in particular shoots? So I guess that's contrast, really.
Right. So midtones is
Lack of contrast, rather.
yeah, like I mean, midtones is just when you're creating light, right? You've got your highlight, right? You've got your midtone, and then you have your shadow. Now, what is the midtone in this image? It would be a question, right? I would say the midtone is her face, right? Her face is properly exposed. This is what Cadence looks like. I know that people watching online are like, nobody can be that. What? But she really is. No, seriously, she's very light skinned. So this is what, that's properly exposed. That is midtone. That's not highlight. There's really no highlight here. No bright highlight, which is what we could do if we want to bring like a hair light or something.
Yeah.
So to me, you want your midtone is your 1, right? So when you're talking about a ratio, the midtone is the 1. If you want them to be richer, or I'm guessing you mean more depth, then you need to probably use, in the case of Cadence, what I would use is a more diffused light source. What's happening here has nothing to do with ratio and more to do with how specularity works with light. When a light is specular, okay, this light is a silver beauty dish. Silver beauty dish is specular. It's not diffused, which means that when the specular highlight is your bright. So I'm using a bright specular light hitting somebody with light skin, like myself, we're the same, and it is bright, right? If I didn't want that, I'd use maybe a softbox. Let's actually do that. Let's switch to a softbox. And we'll see how it changes the tone of her skin.
What do you want, the Octa?
No, I'm gonna use a little softbox about the same size. Before I do that though, I was about to say something else. See, I almost left where I was. If you were shooting this, like I like the 1 to 4 here better, personally. Like my eye catches that better. I like the contrast, there's depth there. But if you were being safe, you could go with the 1 to 2.
You know what we should do? Have her hold up a sign of what the ratio is when you shoot it from now on.
Okay, we'll do that. That's a good idea, Seth. So what I might do here is if I looked at this and I went, you know what, that's safer, but when I shot this one, Cadence was like, oh, I like that. What I would do is I would come up here, I'd keep my settings there, and then I would just drag down, you know, really it's just the shadows a bit, and the highlights a bit too, because you always want to do that, and then a little bit of mid, right? And you see how that gives me the same feel, but I have control here, right? I'm not losing anything in my shadow. This is still, for those who are questioning, to me, this is still doing it in the camera because this is the raw file. Raw file is always going to be flat, right? This is something I could do in the darkroom. I'm not editing this, I'm shooting it like this. Now, this is what I would do if I was doing an actual photo shoot, but since we're teaching a class, we're not going to do that. And we have some paper, thank you. So, yeah, that way it would be easier and I won't have to keep remembering because I'm doing pretty good so far, but this is not going to be. Tomorrow I'm going to be like, I have no idea what this demo was about. Okay, so let's change this to, so that's the 1 to, so I like the 1 to 3, right? And we made, well, I just got rid of it, but we made the 1 to 2 look similar. I probably should have put them next to each other. Can I just go back to that if I go like that? Yeah, there we go. All right, that's, boop. You can see here, you know, I made it similar, not exactly the same, quickly just by doing that. And that way I can shoot the safer exposure, right, and still have, this is not a Capture One class, so I'm sorry if I'm jumping all over the place, but I just want to make a point of saying that you are shooting raw, right? So keep that in mind. Get as close as you can, but also make sure you're being safe, right? We want to shoot things like, when we used to shoot for magazines, remember magazines? They were like made out of paper. And you would have to shoot things flatter because magazine printing by itself is more contrast, doesn't have the detail in the blacks and stuff. So you would look and have this beautiful black and white print, it would look terrible on a magazine. So you have to know we're going to keep it flatter. So it's the same kind of thing. Sometimes we want to shoot flat.
You would shoot flatter a lot for newspaper, like newsprint.
Right, newsprint as well, yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna blind you. Okay, I'm removing the beauty dish. And I'm now going to put on my favorite modifier. Do we ever do a demo? I don't use this probably. This is the Chimera extra small. It's also silver on the inside, but this is double diffused. So we still get a punchiness, and but we have some diffusion. So we should get a little bit more, bring down the specularity on her skin, which will make it a little flatter or richer possibly. I mean, this is all, you know, subtle stuff here, but let's just see. Now, of course, we're stuck here, right, in a way. I just changed my modifier, which means I have to change the power of this light to get my exposure right. But once I do that, what's gonna happen? All my ratios are gonna be screwed up, right? So that is something to consider when you're doing this. Make sure you lock in your modifiers before you start messing around. Now I could confuse the heck out of you by doing math backwards, but we're just gonna start over, okay? Because no math allowed. I like to do the math, not everybody wants me to do it, all right. So let's start from scratch. Here we go. I'm resetting the TTL here, because remember I had it set at a minus with the beauty dish because it was so punchy. So here we are, we're starting from scratch. Our exposure is the same though. 1/200 of a second, 7.1 ISO 100, make a note of that, that's important. It's not really, but turning that off so people online won't think I'm using this light. You all know that I'm not using it, but they might not be able to tell by the flash. I'm gonna position my light. Oh, I don't know if I should share this with you, but do you know that you can do this with the light? It's impressive, I know. Not everybody knows that. Do you remember when they used to have rotating and non-rotating speed rings?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yes. You used to have to pay more for a rotating speed ring.
And it was a screw, it was just one screw.
Yes.
Do you remember we had to build them?
Yes. Oh my God, yes. All right, so you guys have it easy, you kids. All right, so here we go. Again, Chimera, it's right here. Profoto. Roll back the video if you want to know what they are. No, this is the Chimera extra small. This is Profoto B10X Plus. I get 5 cents every time I say it. We're going to make an exposure in TTL. Oh, yeah, beautiful. Okay. Did that fire? It felt like it did. I thought so. All right. We'll edit that part out.
It's off.
Do you guys pretend like it's like a David Copperfield thing? Just pretend in the audience that didn't.
You're done, you got it.
Okay. Deleted. All right, so here we go. Now I've turned off this light. I only turned off the modeling light. Okay, there we go. God, that's nice. All right, so we can see that our specular highlight, our mid-tone, you see her face, right? Compared to, again, this is just this.
Glad you haven't missed a step, Dan. I'm glad you.
You can see how this is not as even, right? It's brighter to darker very much more suddenly than this one, which has the longer mid-tone, right? We don't have that bright highlight. See how smooth that is? That's called diffusion, right? That's what diffusion does. Diffusion doesn't make the light soft, it makes it, hold on, diffused. And diffused light breaks up the source, right? Bright highlights spread out, right? That's what it does.
There's a question about what your white balance is set to.
Okay, so my white balance is... My white balance is set to... Oh, yeah, it is, okay. I was sure I didn't change it. Why is it weird? It's set to 5,000. Why? Because through extensive testing by Seth, we've come to the conclusion that we like 5,000 for these cameras. It's basically set at my version of what I consider to be daylight. So if you're shooting daylight, you know, if you were shooting the sun or whatever you have for natural light, that's what I have it set at. 5,000 for me for this camera is that. So just keep that in mind. But if you have a Nikon Z6, try 5,000. It's really nice. Really any Nikon. All right, where were we? Oh, that's the softbox. Also notice, by the way, that one reason why I didn't start with the softbox was because you see how it doesn't have a grid on it, right? So you can see how much more the light's spread out. So it would have been harder to really show the shadows. That's one reason why I started. Plus, now you can see how nice the softbox is compared to the beauty dish. I either cost you $200 or saved you $400. All right. All right, so now we're gonna add our fill light again. So once again, I'm in TTL, and I'm going to turn this light on with no ratio, right? We're basically just saying make an exposure. So this should give us, in theory, a 1-to-1 with both lights firing. There's 2 shots for your money there. No extra charge for the second one. Actually, I didn't do it, and I know why I didn't do it, which is funny. Thought it would do that. So here's the thing about TTL, and this is what's wonderful about it. It did, right? Yeah. The TTL is way smarter than I am. And it's like, Daniel, you don't want 1-to-1. Nobody does that. No. So seriously, the way TTL works is the lights are talking to each other. So it's probably not exactly 1-to-1. So I do want to do them step by step, because I think this is actually probably a little closer to 1 to 1 point or something. I don't know. Let me just start over. I know. All right, so here we go. B light, we're shooting in TTL. This will be our base exposure. All right, there we go. Same as before, right? The things on the. Now we're gonna actually add the lights together. I'm gonna switch to manual. Turn them on. And the funny thing is, this light, they're both set at the same power. What? There they are. Yeah, there's something wrong with that. What happened? It was off when I
Because you're using the new mode. The new mode wants you to TTL all of them at once.
Okay, that's right. This is the new remote. I should really get this. Yeah. All right, guys. We're going to delete all that in the film, so just never mention that that happened. We're going to leave this where it was, at 8.8. I'm looking at it right now. Remember that, 8.8. I'm going to turn this B light off. I'm going to turn my A light back on. We're going to get our TTL exposure again. Let's just do that. I will explain all this. Sorry. Why is it? All right, here we go. There we go. All right. Time goes back. We're going to set up our exposure. This is a proper exposure. I'm going to switch to manual. 7 is our setting. I'm going to turn the B light on, and I'm going to move it to 8.8 because we remember that was the right setting, right? Was that correct? 8.8? Okay, good. So now we should be at 1-to-1. It only took 20 more minutes than it should have. Okay. There we go. All right, so we're back to that 1-to-1 with the softbox, but we can see how everything is much more kind of creamy and smooth because we're using a lot of diffused light. What we want though here is to get our ratio back to where we liked it before so we can kind of do a comparison, which was like 1-to-3, right? Or 2 stops down, I should say, 1-to-4. So I'm going to turn this down to 6.8. So to reiterate, the look that I personally liked, I didn't ask you what you liked, I know, was this one, right? Yep. All right. And that was 1-to-4 ratio. So I'm going to turn this light situation to the same thing, and we're actually going to use Seth's little thing here, which I totally forgot about. He made all these extra sheets for me. I didn't even use them yet.
I'll charge you later.
Gaines is going to hold that. Yeah. All right, and we can see. Let's take one now without the thing in it, so we can actually get a shot. Yeah, with the face straight. No, they're looking right at me. Sorry. That was like a, there we go. We can see now that we get shadow. And actually here, I believe that to me, this is still a little bit too light. We might even go down one more stop, right? So again, that ratio, remember what I said earlier, if you came in here going, hey, I really liked the 1-to-4 ratio for portraits, right? Somebody makes that statement online, they step online and they go, here I am, I'm online on Adorama TV. 1-to-4 ratio, that's the way to do it. Well, that's not the same as this, is it? No, because it's two different modifiers, right? It's not the same, right, to set the power that way. You've got to actually look at how you want to shape it, what modifier is using, what part of the skin it's covering, all that matters. All the ratio will do for you is give you a starting point. So we could start it there and go, and now I'm gonna look at it and go, you know what, I think that's, if I wanna match that top one, 1 to 4 is not gonna do it. I wanna be a little darker, right? So now I can come up here and go, well, 6.8, I'm always just doing 1 stop at a time because 1 full stop is always how we do it. That's closer, right? It's not gonna be exactly the same because it's 2 different modifiers, but for me, we're getting a deeper shadow here, but we're still getting that even face. This now is 3 stops, right? So we multiply it each time, so it's double, 2, 4, 8. This is 1 to 8, right? Which, did you make it 1 to 8? Probably not, doesn't matter.
You want 1 to 8?
Nah, that's fine.
For you.
This is a 1 to 8. So we can keep playing with this until we get the ratio we like. Like I said before, oh, yes, we have it. He just made it, so now I felt bad. Instead of worrying about, generally speaking, instead of worrying about what ratio should I walk into this portrait to shoot because somehow I've decided this is something that I read that this is the way to do it, what we really want to do is go, who's in front of me? What feeling do I want to evoke? And how do I get there? That's what we're really looking for. When we're done and we have the shot we like, that's when we think about the ratio. And we can do that because we know where we started. That's why if you watch me do these demos, you always see me like 1 light at a time, building it up each time. Part of that I'm doing it because it's easier to show you, but part of it is because I know that each of these lights started at 1 to 1, and then I adjusted them. So when I went down 3 stops on this light, I know where I'm at. Okay, ratio-wise, yes.
It just looks like a high fashion mugshot with the stripes.
It does, yes. It's definitely that's the cover of Nylon magazine or something. All right. Questions, thoughts, concerns? Oh, we're cruising. Keep. Oh, crowd question. Yes.
Hi, how are you? You were talking about the shooting for the magazines. What did a lot of the editors look for when you were saying how they were flat when it comes time for the lighting for the shooting for the magazines?
Are they looking for what?
You were shooting for the magazines.
Yeah. Shooting for the magazine. Yeah, yeah.
I guess like what would be ideal? You were saying that it was flat.
Okay, right. So,
Like what would I guess the editors be? I guess looking for with the
So what is flat, right? It's easy. Let's make it flat. When we are looking at our images, we want to make sure that we have information, right? Without any kind of bringing anything up or bringing anything down. Our raw image as we're sitting at it, we want to make sure there's information in our highlights with no recovery and information in our shadows. That's the baseline, right? What we want to do is think about the range of our camera. If we are shooting something and we look at it and there's information in our shadows, but we want a darker shadow because we like that mood, we can shoot it flatter, right? With information and then darken it using, our tools. That's way better because we don't lose information. That's really what we want to be. So you want to stay within a few stops. Back in the day when we were shooting film, especially, they had the 3-stop rule. Everything was within 3 stops because that's what a magazine printed at. So if you were dealing with somebody who was printing in a magazine and they we were able to share that with you and ask them, you could ask them what the range is of the printer that they're using, right? Because that's where you're at. Like what your dynamic range of your camera is a gazillion stops these days, right? It's like, oh, whatever, I could shoot a black frame and pull it out and it'd be perfect. But can the magazine paper do that? No, right? So we want to make sure within our image, we don't have, a 10 exposure range, right? We want to make sure our exposure is within about 3 stops on our figure if we weren't going to print. But as long as you can see detail, that's where I would put it. That's where I would be safe. Now, me personally, when I finish my images, I like my highlights to almost go white. But I don't deliver to something that's going to be printed that way. When I make it to print or to put on my site, I do it that way because that's what I like. But when I shoot it flatter than that. Always shoot it flatter. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, good? Yeah. All right, let's go the other way. Because there was a question earlier about the sun. And I said I might do that, so let's just do it, right? If we want to use, well, first of all, let's just do a hair light. We'll start there, right? Let's start with a kicker because now we're going to go the opposite direction, right? Generally speaking, we're going to want our hair light or our kicker to seem brighter than our light on the subject's face, our key light. That's usually the standard. And I say seem because you might find that the actual exposure is the same or even dimmer. It just depends on the person's hair, really, and the angle it comes in at. Because what makes hair stand out is the reflection of the hair, so the oils in the hair. All right, we'll use this as a hair light, why not? So we're gonna take our light that was our key light, and we're gonna make it the hair light. Now, again, if we're gonna do this in a studio type setting like we're doing here, you're gonna wanna start with your key light because that's your one in the ratio, right? So let's kill this light back here. That's the A light. And let's take the B light and I'm gonna remove this silk because we don't want to create a really flat light because, you know, I just don't want it to go flying. All right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna switch this out and use that 3-foot Octa as our key. You know, that seems like the right thing to do. The kids really like the Octas. It's what they're using these days.
The TikTokers likes the Octas.
Yeah, when they're hanging out at the soda shop.
The soda shop.
Getting their ice cream sodas.
With your moon pies and your soda jicks.
All right. All right. Trying to not trip over myself in the middle of it. All right. All right, so let's talk hair lights quickly, or separate, well, specifically hair lights here. Generally speaking, when we're doing it, you can come a little forward. I backed up a little bit. A little more. Get rid of it. All right. I personally prefer, because somebody's going to ask me. Thank you. When the hair light is on the opposite side of my key, almost always. Why? That's just how I like it. You might like it the same. There is a difference. If you are shooting someone photographing someone, and you put the key light on this side, and then you fill, like, let's say, a hair light from the same side, that will generally feel more natural, because if there was a big window here that was like, this is a window, right? Everybody believes that it's a window when they see that in the catch light. That's, you know, like in my studio, I have daylight studio. If I photograph somebody in the studio, all the light's coming from one side, right? I can't put a reflector over here from the daylight and bounce back a hair light because it wouldn't, as I said before, it couldn't be brighter than the key light. So all the light from one direction feels more natural. That's how, you know, if you're talking about natural light. If you're in a building though, or you're trying to establish something, like if I was at a wedding, let's say, and I was photographing someone, and I wanted to make it feel like they were in the event, then I might take a light that's got a similar color temperature, like let's say the store is kind of warm, and hit it with the hair light from the opposite side, because that feels like, oh, this is the light from the party that's lighting their hair, right? We want to think about what our lights mean in our shots. So I usually like to do it this way because I don't mind portraits to look like they're lit, because that's what I do. But if you want them to look more natural, some people will tell you, and I don't doubt it, that hair light from the same side looks more natural. Also, people say that putting it at CTO on a light makes it lit the sun. All right, which is not true either. All right, so this is an Octagon, the favorite light of YouTubers. And
You literally have a video where you say it's your favorite modifier.
well, it's my favorite modifier. And I'm a YouTuber. I guess I was right then. All right, so I'm putting in a TTL. We're going to get a baseline for our light. When you're setting up a light, you know, again, we're doing this kind of 3/4 simple pattern. You want to put the light roughly the size of the light away from the subject, above their eye level, all that good stuff. My exposure has not changed, by the way. There you go, Octagon. All right, again, simple. Now we're going to add a hair light. We look at this and we're like, oh, jazzy. We need to give a little bit. You need to give a little punch. You can. Is that not what people say?
How many more years is this going, guys? Why are we doing
All right, anyways. All right, so when we're placing our hair light, we want to consider that when remember that photographic lighting generally is not lasers, beams, right? When we're shooting our light, it's not like this, unless you have a snoot or something, it's not just gonna put a little dot of light on something. It spreads out, right? And we have to think about, what do we see in the camera, right? I'm lighting her hair, right? But you don't see the back of her head in the shot, right? So what we wanna actually light is the part of her that we see, so the side of her hair, right? We don't wanna put it directly behind her unless you wanna create like a real, you wanna just kinda graze it across. So you'll often see, when people are setting up hair lights, that they put them out here and looking straight forward. This light is gonna spread out and touch the side of her head. So I'll turn the modeling on so you guys can see that. Right, so we can, I don't know, might be too bright in here to see that. Can you kill the? Yeah, just for a second. I think that way they can see it better. All right, it's gonna be hard to see, but that's a very dim modeling light. Oh, I have it turned down, that's fine. No, I don't. Yeah, I did. Okay, all right, there we go. You see where it is? See how it's hitting her? It's actually going all the way to the octagon. You see it's still hitting her, right? Because people will say, oh yeah, the light's not pointed at her, but it is, right? Because it's hitting my hand, right? Right? The audience isn't, you don't think it's hitting my hand?
No, will it bounce off your other light?
Oh yeah, it'll bounce off the other light. And that can be used to effect, right? So that's a good question. Is it gonna bounce off of this? Yes, but will it be brighter than this? Probably not, because again, it's got to travel. Even if this light is exposed brighter, it's got to travel to there and back to her, right? So even if it was brighter by a stop or so when it's her, by the time the inverse square law kicks in, you're not going to get, it's not going to affect it. But we'll see that when we set it up. You'll see it bounce off of a thing. All right, so here we go. We remember our exposure. Give us a black frame if we don't have any other light involved. I'm going to take this light. Now I've learned my lesson. It's at 5.8, right? Okay, I'm gonna turn on the A light. I'm gonna put in TTL. Now, TTL notoriously does a terrible job with hair lights. So let's see what happens here. Yeah, that's pretty terrible, but no, that's not terrible. Okay, so here we have a hair light that is, well, okay, the back, I a long time ago threw away the back, someone asked about that, threw away the back baffle of my softbox, so you're gonna get some light in the background. Live with it.
Strip light?
I could use a strip light, but I like my light better. All right, yeah, let's use a strip light so we can be more clean.
You're the one that has an open back light.
I know, I threw it away because it was cool. Back in the 90s, we did all kinds of crazy stuff. I bought this light in 2012. All right, this is a strip bank with a grid.
Everything's a catch.
All right. Now the grid is going to narrow the beam of light. So we're going to...
Someone said use your pant leg.
I could just... That's why you have pants with the legs that come off. That's it.
But then you got to take off your Dungeons and Dragons Converse to get to it.
I would. All right.
Your custom-made Dungeons and Dragons Converse.
I custom ordered these Converse. All right. I really did, actually.
People need to know his love of Dungeons and Dragons.
Well worth the price. All right, I think that's pretty good. All right.
No, this isn't a new background. It's the same background paper from day one.
Yeah, they only give one roll a year, so we're still...
Put 3 rolls up there. Don't start with me.
Well, it's for the next 3 years. I'm trying not to run out of... All right, so... Okay. Strip bank, right? Very popular for hair lights because they have a long, narrow body so we can get like the arm and the hair. Remember, I started saying this, and then of course I didn't finish my sentence because I often do that. It's the reflectance of the hair is based on the oils in it, right, Seth? So you want your hair light to be big. Because think about it, if you have something that's reflective, let's say you have a car bumper, and you take a flashlight and you shine it on the car bumper or the sun, you get a bright spot in the center, right? And then whatever. But if you took a softbox and did it, it would be nice and even and lit. That's how they light cars, right? That's how we light hair, like cars. We're lighting the reflection. Okay, so here's the new box. We're gonna reset and do the shot. Again, hopefully it won't spill in the background so much. Because we got it nice and closed up. There we go. That's a proper light. Thank you, Seth. Seth, everyone, give him a phone. All right, good.
It's not my fault. I got to do half your job for you.
All right, so this is not terrible exposure. This is why it's worthwhile to take a second to do it. And again, while I'm working with my subject here and we have time and we're doing a demo to show you what to do. Again, if I had 5 minutes with Cadence on a set of a movie, I would be setting this up ahead of time and make sure my ratios are right? This is why we're doing this. We used to a long time ago, we would actually pre-shoot stuff. Like we'd go in there and shoot the scene without somebody there, like with an assistant the day before, if you just didn't have time with somebody. So just keep in mind, practice, try things, but then make notes. So this right here is at its TTL. This is what the camera believes is the correct exposure. So effectively, this is 1, right? Here I'm going to use a light meter, and I'll do it in a second. Ah, I screwed it up. I got to learn how to use this controller better. We'll do that again. I turned it back on with them on TTL. Okay, here we go. I'm doing that again because I want to lock the exposure in. All right, that looks good. That was consistent. That's very nice. We're going to turn off TTL, 8.9. 8.9. 5.8 from this one, right? You guys are supposed to remember. You would never make it as a photo assistant. All right. Okay.
You're all fired. Goodbye.
All right, so the 5.9. So we're going to start here. I'm glad, or maybe it was 5.8. 5.8. All right, here we go. There we go. Now you're saying that didn't do anything.
Well, cut off her head.
That's all right, you can clap. No, this is a 1-to-1 hair light. Okay, not every hair light has to be blazing a light from the side, like we're in some 1980s, 8th grade portrait. You can do that, and that's awesome sometimes, but sometimes it's about subtle, the subtle bounce of the light coming through, right? So that is a subtle 1-to-1 ratio hair light. Now we can definitely go the other way, right? Because I know some of you guys are like, I love the 80s. So,
That's the deal every day, all day. Oh man, yeah.
all right. So we're going to bring this up. Well, actually, this is an 8.9, so I can only bring it up one stop. So we might not be able to go full glam, but we're gonna do it. This is like full on Bon Jovi. All right, here we go. We're going to 10. One stop over, so 1-to-2, right? Or 2-to-1, actually, this would be. Set it backwards. This would be 2-to-1 ratio. That's a 2-to-1, okay? So 1-to-1, 2-to-1, right? Simple as that. And somewhere in between can also work. And would it be different if she had a different, different hairstyle, a different hair at period, like my hair, your hair? Yeah, it would be, right? But we can get a baseline of where we're at, right? This is one stop over. You probably don't need to do more than that, but if unless you really like the glam.
It's a style choice, right? Like,
Right.
Remember when I first met you and I showed you all those zombie and aliens? You're like, oh, that's overexposed. Like, no, it's style. It's style.
And then I copied it as best I could. Not very well. All right.
But it's true. If you're shooting something that's like cosplay, you might want hard rim lights snapping and making
It's
that
true.
look.
What is what are we doing, right? And also, it also matters the background. So here, right, I've got this like subtle gray background because we're using the YouTuber special, an octagon. But if I had a light that wasn't hitting the background, right, at all, this background would be black, and then that 1-to-1 ratio would be even more obvious, right? So sometimes, like if the background was white, the 1-to-1 would look like nothing, right? You might have to go more. So you got to kind of play that up and think about where the person is, right? So, and again, we only have 2 lights, so we can't, but if we had a third light, we could add a fill light and put whatever ratio we want. We can do it with a reflector, but we just won't know the actual, once again, I didn't do the thing I was going to do. That's our ratio using TTL. But where are we at power-wise? Let's look at the meter.
It's right there.
Okay. All right, so this is a light meter, Seconic light meter, L308. It's good they write the name on it. XU. I'm going to put in my ISO, which is 100, right? Remember that from earlier? My shutter speed, which is 200. I'm going to put it in flash mode. Could you just pop it for me so I don't have to take the thing off? Though? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the light toward the light. 5.6. 8. Okay? Does that feel right to you? This light is actually not as bright. But because of its angle, because of how it's coming into the camera, because of her hair, this light is actually one stop power-wise or less powerful. But in camera, it looks like it's one stop more powerful. So as you're setting up your ratios, keep that in mind. You know, the reflection of the light's going to matter. So you may want to a different thing. And again, you wouldn't know that without trying them, but if you never use a light meter, you don't need to know it. But if you do use a light meter, it's important to know. Right? Okay, I know there was a question. Okay, easy, right?
Also, you got to realize he's measuring the edge of the light when it's going towards cadence off the strip, right?
Right.
So if he was measuring the center of that light, he would probably.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if I measure it from here, it would be way bright. Yeah, I mean, yeah, 16.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, you're not doing it right if you're not wasting most of your light.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it, right? We're not aiming the light at the back of her head. If you find yourself in the position where you have to do that because you don't have enough power, then that's move it closer, maybe, whatever. Because if we aim it at the back of her head, we're not going to see where it really hits. We want the edge of the light to come in. So that's important. We're getting 5.6 at our subject. And again, all that matters because what matters is the photo, right? The numbers, the science is all important. We know kind of the math, right? Well, I'll give you credit for knowing the math. We won't test it. But what matters is what it looks like, right? So in the end, it doesn't matter that this bottom picture is actually the opposite of what it looks like. What it matters is we like a bright highlight in the hair, and that looks great. If I'm building this shot again, though, and if I had a light meter, and if I was drawing a lighting diagram, it would be important for me to know that, because if I just looked at that, and I went, well, the hair light should be brighter, and I just made this light brighter, more powerful, it would be wrong, right? I'm saying the reading of the hair light. Does that make sense? I know. See, I did that at the end to blow your mind, right? You like that? I blew your mind, didn't I? I totally knew that it was going to read like that. All right. Any questions, thoughts, concerns?
Yeah, you're good.
Took some semesters of calculus. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, it's just important. So things to know. Here we go. We'll wrap up the math. Ratios have to do with the percentage, right? So the 1 is always your key light. Whatever the light is your main light that's shaping your subject, base your 1 on the ratio on that. So this, the beauty dish earlier, the small softbox, right? The other number is the number of, basically percentage-wise. So half the power, quarter of a power, eighth of a power. But keep in mind that every stop that you adjust your aperture, your power rather, is one stop is double or half. So if you go one stop of power, it's 1 to 2, but if you go 2 stops of power, it's 1 to 4. Okay, then 1 to 8, etc. Okay, that makes sense? All right, do the math, you'll get it.
Right.
I don't know when I'm back. Do you know when I'm back?
You can go to adorama.com/events for everything that's coming up next. Don't forget to like in here. Dan needs it to feel better about himself every day.
I do.
So,
I will sob. Or I'll sob more if you don't. Whatever. Thank you. Thank you.
Here, you can follow Dan here
Oh, nice.
and Cadence.
I'm
I don't
sure
know.
I'm
Just
pointing
say Cadence's IG.
at Cadence Frank.
All right, this is the worst exit ever. Thanks, guys. Listen, we'll
We'll be
don't forget
here.
to check out the other Adorama YouTube channel, Adorama Events, for the other stuff that gets streamed out of here. I know I'm off camera, but whatever. Imagine me, okay? And we'll see you on the next one, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, like all this stuff, and write down a bunch of comments. Thanks, everybody. Clap so it sounds cool.